There has to be an answer to the delirious world that we live in. There has to be, and there is. The fact that you haven't found the answer has nothing to do with it. That is, with the existence of the answer itself. It is there, whether you know it or not, whether you want it or not. So that's very encouraging if you've come here tonight because you want answers that answer something, answers that change something inside of you, so that you go through your day and go through your night too, for that matter, while you're asleep, in a way that's unique, with a uniqueness that the world knows nothing of, wants nothing to do with, a uniqueness that is very beautiful because it is indeed without effort on your part. And I'll tell you a long, long story in connection with that. And I want you to see, as I go to the story, to the illustration, and to the application, that I'm describing perhaps your life and the life of the people that are around you. There was a man, a scientist, who lived in the very world you lived in. He was famous, well known. He knew the answers to the stars and the seas and the earth. A world-renowned scientist, famous in the public eye, interviewed by newspaper reporters all the time. And on the surface, of course, if you looked at him, you would say, here's a man who has it made. Here's a man who has everything that this world has to offer. He has his fame and he has his fortune. He has people seeking him out. But this man, being a scientist, was a little more investigative of his own life than other people are. And he understood that the fame and the acclaim that he had throughout the world, with the world coming to his door, he understood that that was really a very shallow thing. And he understood it very close to home because in his personal life, in his daily life, when the TV cameras weren't on him and the reporters weren't interviewing him, when he went home all by himself, he was intelligent enough to see the difference in his condition when he was all alone and the condition he presented to the world when he was out there, out among the crowds. For a long, long time, he wondered about the difference between his public self and his private self. And being a scientist, he decided to investigate it, look into it, put his life under a microscope, and try to find out just why there was this difference between his apparent happiness out at the banquets and joking with people and giving speeches. He wanted to find out why there was a difference between that and the way he actually felt when he was all alone, or thinking to himself, even when he was with other people. So he studied for a long, long time. He made his mind sort of a scientific laboratory, studied himself as he went around out in the world, as he studied in his own laboratory and wrote scientific reports. And after a long time of investigation, a very startling thought came to him. And a startling thought that the sooner you come to it, the better it'll be for you too. And here's what it was. Now, think how startling this might be if you were to see this all at once to yourself here tonight. It became obvious to him that he was not living his own life. He had studied it, and that was the only conclusion he could come to. When he was out there in the world receiving honors from other scientists, from the public, from politicians, receiving awards, he sensed that that was his public life, what was expected of him. But it wasn't his own life, because he was still a very unhappy man. When the distraction of the award went away, and he went home alone, driving home even, he could see that he couldn't take back home with him what he had been given by the world. He couldn't take it home with him. He was living a life that was dictated by the public, by other people, by their demands, which were often concealed under high-sounding phrases that we'd like to have you here because you're a famous man and we need your presence. And he understood that he was a slave to the public, to the world. That part became very clear to him then. Now you remember that first point. He wasn't living his own life. Do you think that you're living your own life? You would almost vow that you were, because you would say, what do you mean, not living my own life? I do what I want to do. Now, what do you mean by that you do what you want to do? Could it be that you're constantly doing things that you don't want to do, and you know the answer to that is yes? You're constantly being impelled to be in the company of people perhaps you don't want their company. Perhaps you're doing things that or you're doing simply because you have a habit system that says you should do them. And you pause long enough right now to decide whether you're living your free life, what you want to do, or is it being imposed on you by something you don't quite know what it is. But someone seems to be always telling you what to do, right? You know that. Something from the outside and something from the inside, too, is always telling you what to do with your life, how to talk. Look at your conversation and see if that's the way you really would like to talk. Maybe you would rather just be quiet and not talk at all. But you get in these social situations and it's quiet in the room and you think that the silence shouldn't be there, and so you talk. Force yourself to talk. And you don't even know that you wish that you didn't have to. Anyway, the scientist understood that he was not living his own life, and he was getting pretty tired of it. He had seen enough that he was beginning to rebel inwardly. He didn't know what to do about it. But he knew the fact of his condition, and what a nice thing that is, that he could simply see that he couldn't kid himself anymore, that all that was going out in the world of honors and popularity and newspaper reporters coming around didn't contribute a thing to his real happiness. So he studied that again for a long time. And he said to himself, maybe, just maybe now, if I'm on the right track, he said to himself, I am doing something that is causing me to not live my own life, to not do what I want to do inwardly. He understood that he was going to be a scientist all his life. That was okay. He understood that's the way he made his living. That's what he was interested in. That was fine. He understood that part. That was all right. But maybe there was something that he was doing wrong in connection with his profession, with his being a scientist, something that made him not a happy human being. He had everything outwardly that he could want, but why was he still subject to moods of depression and bitterness and fear? So he said, I'm going to continue to be an inward scientist and see if I can go on to the next step. The first step was a very clear statement by myself, to myself, that I'm not living my own life, that other people and things inside of me are dictating it to me, and that I just don't like. And I don't want to put up with it anymore if it is possible to break it. Now, I'm a scientist, and I'm not going to go into conclusions. I'm going to see if it's possible or not. So he studied himself. When he'd go out to a reception of some kind, or he'd go out working with other scientists, he studied himself and he studied what happened to him. And putting it under the microscope, he came up to one great conclusion. He was in his laboratory, a desk in his laboratory one night, and he felt that he was making progress toward the second discovery in his self-investigation. And it all seemed just about to be able to be defined in a single word. So he sat at his desk, thought about his past life, the horror of it, how he had sold himself very often to applause when he would rather have stayed home. And he came down to one single word, which he wrote on a piece of paper to double the impression in his mind. Where I am going wrong, and this was a shock to him, where I am going wrong is in my own aggression.